Hello, my name's Anne. On behalf of Great Heights Training, I'd like to welcome you back to the Assessor Refresher course.
In this session, we're going to be looking at the area of assessment planning. We will look at the process, the approach, and the element of paperwork that you may be using within this process. So the planning process itself, obviously this begins at the initial meeting with the learner. And this gives you an opportunity to identify learner needs, find out about their learning style, which would be best suited to your approach with regards to your selection of assessment methods and the tools that you may use. So it's essential to support the learner in the selection of the units as previously established. This will actually allow you to ensure that the work activities will provide the evidence to cover all of the standards of performance. Also the evidence requirements and the knowledge and understanding requirements in order to meet the qualification. Consideration should also be given to existing evidence that can be used to avoid unnecessary repetition. So any previous assessment or prior learning needs to be taken into account. Obviously it's essential that you follow the guidelines, so any previous prior learning is also validated and reliable, and often supported with a statement from the individual to establish that they not only still have that knowledge but also know how to apply it. Within the planning process, it's possible to look closer at the activities that the learner does within the workplace. And this allows you to identify the evidence that will demonstrate competence and in turn to meet given criteria across the award, certificate or diploma, rather than looking at individual criteria or units, which often result in doubling up and repetition. So it's essential that the learner understands the objectives and agrees with the selection that should, wherever possible, be naturally occurring evidence. There are some areas which do allow for role play or staged evidence. For example, if you were collecting evidence on how someone would deal with a particular type of emergency, evacuating a building for example, then obviously you wouldn't need to hope for that emergency, but it may be necessary to actually stage something like that. But in general terms, it's normally considered good practice, and also in terms of meeting quality assurance, that all the evidence that you do collect is naturally occurring and that the individual is using those particular skills within their given tasks or within their day-to-day work. When planning an assessment, it is also important to take account the workplace setting. There may be company regulations and the learner's availability may be restricted, and it may impact on the assessment methods also that can be planned. So ensure that you do get to know the workplace setting and the requirements of the individual, ensuring that you have missions from line management, ensuring that the disruption is kept to a minimum and that your role actually enhances their place within the work. Dependent on the assessment method that's being selected, and we will look at these in closer detail in another session, but it may be important to plan ahead with regards to maybe a quiet room is needed if a discussion is going to be taking place, or when looking at observations, making sure that activities are actually planned for those particular days. If, for example, you were observing someone within a childcare environment and that particular day individuals were going out for the day and it wasn't something that you could be involved in terms of time scale. So there are issues that do need to be planned and discussed with the learner. The workplace setting may have health and safety considerations, and there may be restricted areas for you to be able to observe, and therefore it's constantly looking at what the workplace setting is, what the individual requirements are, and how best to match these. A further consideration is the choice of assessment method. It may be that it's actually prescribed by the awarding body, or that you have open choice. It's a good idea to also consult and make sure you have agreement from the individual learner. For example, there may be the opportunity to use video or it may be that the individual really doesn't want to use video. So discussing these things in advance and actually planning them will make the whole process a lot easier. So awarding organisations or training centres may have different preferred methods, and obviously you'll need to check this, particularly if working with a new awarding organisation. There may be particular methods that they recommend, or there may be some that they actually say that they would rather that you didn't use. So it's always important to keep these in mind. Let's consider the assessment plan. So the assessment plan is key in preparing for assessment. It gives you that framework to be able to work within. It communicates the assessment requirement to the learner, allowing you to be transparent in your requirements, but also it highlights that individuals have also agreed to any given task or requirement. It also contributes towards quality assurance. The forms that are used are not standardised in terms of everybody may use something slightly different, but the overall contribution and structure is something that is generally used by everybody. It's also very important for audit purposes. It allows the verifier to actually go through your contact with the individual, to be able to see the progression that's taken place, to be able to acknowledge what tasks an individual has had, what flexibility is being given to them, and if there are any issues within the workplace that needed to be discussed or highlighted. It also allows the individuals to be able to reflect on their work, in terms of they have a copy of the plan, they can actually also see what's required of them, and also as a tool for reference to staff or other colleagues. As previously mentioned, it's important that the assessment plan is actually agreed with the candidate, that they actually take an active role in their learning process, but also being able to agree gives them a sense of ownership and also helps ensure that the particular tasks will be carried out. So as an assessor, you should guide the learner, give them some encouragement and support with regards to understanding their job role, how it interprets to the actual course, how it fits in and meets the criteria. So you will discuss with the learner and agree the plan for assessment, making sure that the tasks that are required are being covered, and also obviously ensuring that learners' needs are taken into consideration when planning assessment. There may be accessibility needs, there may be with regards to the actual company or the organisation, there may be preferences linked to learning style. So all these elements need to be considered, and by getting the individual to agree, you're also ensuring that in most instances it's possible for the task to be completed. So we've talked about the approach to the assessment plan. Now it's important to actually think about the actual content. As I mentioned, the forms may vary from place to place with regards to the centre requirements, but in terms of the content they tend to be generally very similar. So obviously you will have a date and a time that has been agreed between yourself and the learner that any assessment will be taking place, for planning and also for any meetings that are actually agreed. You'll also have the names of both the learner and the assessor, and it's important to also have the qualification name. This is good for auditing purposes, to be allow it to be clarified exactly who the assessment pieces of work belong to. You will also be identifying the methods of assessment to be used. This also helps you in that by writing down the type of assessment method allows you to think, oh, have I used that one before? Should I use something else? Actually think about what approach would be best for any particular given task. Then we're identifying the location. This is often, a workplace setting, but it may be that there are some variation. It may be that there's an assessment taking place in a more informal setting, which obviously also needs to be identified. Again, then you have the time and date of assessment and the people involved in that particular process. The next point is what is being assessed. So is it a particular task that an individual is doing? Is it an area whereby somebody would need to have others involved? Are they working in an IT environment? Have they got access to the necessary IT equipment? So there are lots of things to be thought about in terms of, if you're assessing something that is timely, then will it actually take place on that given day? Is that appropriate for the organisation? Can the organisation wait for a month before you're back in to assess something for a particular activity to take place? So it's important to consider these things. Health and safety is always in the mind of everybody and should be considered and explained to the learner, and with any comments or feedback, then possibilities of adding any health and safety concerns or anything that has been raised. And finally, any assessment plan needs to be signed by the learner and the assessor. This is obviously important for the audit trail, but also, again, to acknowledge that the content of that has been read, has been understood, and is owned by the individuals. So let's look at the assessment plan. There's an example of one here, and this actually takes us through the process. So this is actually designed for every assessment meeting arranged between the candidate learner and the assessor. So it's completed by both parties and obviously agreed by both individuals. So it documents the meeting by showing the elements or units to be discussed, which is in the first column. The proposed activity, here it's highlighted as a to-do list. So what the candidate will produce in order to achieve relevant evidence for the qualification. We also have the target date, when the assessor and learner will meet again to review the evidence. And once the candidate produced sufficient evidence to complete the element, the completion date can then be inserted. And finally, the assessor will write any feedback on the evidence produced or how the documentation has been cross-referenced. Now, for some centres it may be that this is two separate documents. One will be for planning assessment, another one will be for feedback. In this case it's been combined, and therefore this particular document would be used over 2 visits. The first one for planning the assessment, and then obviously attending and feedback on that particular meeting. There is also a box on the bottom right hand corner for feedback from the candidate, and this allows them to have an opportunity to state how they have found the process, if there are areas that they are particularly happy with or if they have any concerns. It's normally being able to acknowledge what they've achieved and be able to reflect briefly on what they have done within that particular assessment task. So once the plan has been agreed, then both the assessor and the candidate or learner will actually sign and date the document. So this then produces a clear piece of evidence that also allows the audit trail for individual in terms of their course and what they've actually followed through. So as highlighted, once the plan is created, and the learner should sign and comment to encourage reflection, whilst also providing a clear audit trail. All learner outcomes must be achieved in order for the credit to be awarded. So mapping is an effective way of ensuring that nothing is missed. It's quite a complex process when looking, particularly when considering a holistic approach and trying to maximise the evidence that is produced by the learner, ensuring that the criteria is met fully, but also by a range of evidences so that each criteria is clearly covered. So this concludes the session on assessment planning. Hopefully this has allowed you to reflect and think about the approaches that you already use, and I think you will find that most of the tools and the way in which you do assess hasn't really changed much. The whole process really is a more central focus on HELIC planning, which we'll be looking at closer in the next session. Thank you.